influenced, Jesuit educated, Jesuit associated people who are behind this whole analysis of the pandemic and who are calling for this shutdown of America that is apparently designed to, one, wreck the American economy, and two, usher in what they keep calling over and over and over again a new world order, a whole new way of doing things now. The entire world is going to change. It'll never be the same again. They keep telling us. They keep saying this again and again, that there's no going back from coronavirus. And yet here we find all of these Jesuits in positions of influence surrounding President Trump at the White House. Very, very interesting. This is what we're going to talk about on the program today. Now, when we say Jesuit, we have to understand you have members of the order who are actually Jesuit priests. Then you have those who are educated by and influenced by the Jesuits, and they are often called Jesuits of the short robe. It means they're not necessarily an official member of the order, but they serve the interests of the order with what they do. And historically, they are literally called the Jesuits of the short robe. And this is what we mean when we talk about Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Deborah Birx, and Melinda Gates, in particular, the wife of Bill Gates. And then Bill Gates really by default, but I think it's through his wife, Melinda Gates. All right, now before we get more detailed into this, I want to play an audio clip. This is Dr. Anthony Fauci at Georgetown University, the Jesuit University in Georgetown, where he gave a speech back in 2017 where he said that there was no doubt that President Donald Trump was going to experience a surprise pandemic. Listen.
Given, as you heard from the introduction, that I have been around for a while and have had the opportunity and the privilege and the pleasure of serving in 5 administrations, I thought I would bring that perspective to the topic today, is the issue of pandemic preparedness. And if there's one message that I want to leave with you today, based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why history, and the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID, will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.
Now, again, this is part of a speech, a presentation that Dr. Anthony Fauci gave in January of 2017. That's shortly after the election of Donald Trump as president of the United States, shortly after he defeated Hillary Clinton. And here's Dr. Fauci, the Jesuit-educated physician at the Jesuit Institution of Georgetown University, which I have said before, if you ever hear something announced out of Georgetown, you should pay attention. I talked about when they had professors there that were saying that the gay marriage ruling was going to be decided in the next session, and there's no question about it. And of course, that's what happened. And now we see, even though I didn't know about this clip here until recently, I have to admit that, I didn't even know who Dr. Fauci was. I never paid attention to the guy. I've never seen him on the national stage before, but if you research him, he has been a deep state player for decades. And he's associated with all of these radical leftists in Washington, D.C., of course, because the Jesuits are the radical left. All right, but with this in view, let's talk about the players here, at least as we can see them right now. Let's talk about Bill and Melinda Gates in particular, because let's not forget that it's not just Bill Gates, it's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that is very involved in what's going on right now with all of the coronavirus activity and the staunch recommendations from Bill Gates that America should be in lockdown until they develop a vaccine to combat the coronavirus. And of course, this is the advice that is being given by Dr. Anthony Fauci. And we all saw there in the interview where President Donald Trump wanted to get the country back up and going again by April 12th for Easter. That was Trump's ambition, his desire, which he stated. And then Dr. Fauci stepped in and said, well, no, that's not something that's realistic. This is going to take much longer, etc., to require the shutdown. And of course, a lot of people are recognizing all over the country and different parts of the world that the reality is this is the new world order power grab. This is what they're doing. And what's behind it? Well, I think that the old saying, all roads lead to Rome, there's a lot of evidence of the Vatican's involvement through the Jesuit order, what I consider to be Rome's agents at work right here in the United States. And I think that Fauci, Birx, and Bill and Melinda Gates are part of this agenda. Bill and Melinda Gates have given millions of dollars, somewhere between $6 to $30 million in grant money to the Jesuit education system right here in America, specifically to the Jesuits, not just to Catholic education, but specifically to the Jesuits themselves. In fact, let's just look at some of this. This is, you can go online, you can look up the Cristo Rey Network, Cristo Rey Jesuit High School, and they have these education models across the country. And this is what Bill and Melinda Gates have provided financing for. And they have on their website Hillary Clinton at a dedication ceremony back in 1996. They've got a photo of her there giving some kind of a speech. And of course, the Clintons through Georgetown University and so on are very close to the Jesuit order. Remember, when Hillary ran for president, she chose Tim Kaine, who was educated by Jesuits as well, and that was all part of his profile. But let's look at this quote from a presentation given by Melinda Gates at the TED Exchange, which is a globalist group. They're pushing all kinds of globalist activities there, including the normalization of pedophilia. That's how bad they are. I mean, they're very, very extremely bad. Well, when Melinda Gates spoke there, she said at one point in her speech, she said, quote, "And I think as long as we're really clear about what our agenda is, there's a global movement waiting to happen and ready to get behind this totally uncontroversial idea. When I grew up in a Catholic home," she said. "I still consider myself a practicing Catholic. My mom's great uncle was a Jesuit priest. My great aunt was a Dominican nun. She was a school teacher and a principal her entire life. In fact, she's the one that taught me as a young girl how to read. I was very close to her." Okay, and then she goes on from there. Now, the Dominicans, we know about the Jesuits here. We talk about them a pretty good bit, and the fact that they are the point at the end of the spear for the Counter-Reformation. But we should not forget the Dominicans. Why? Because as we show in our film, A Lamp in the Dark, it was the Dominicans who were named after Dominic Guzman, who is called Saint Dominic in the Catholic Church. It was Dominic who ultimately instigated the beginnings of what would become the Great Inquisition. And the Dominican order grew out of all of that, and the Dominicans were, for the first 300 years, they were the priests who ran the Inquisition. Then the Jesuits picked it up, and they ran it for about 300 years. So the two orders are very, very significant in terms of Rome's persecution of people for so-called heresy, their ideas of heresy, which is basically if you disagree with them, you're a heretic. All right, so that is the Rome Jesuit connection with Bill and Melinda Gates, at least as far as we understand it right now. But again, they've given millions of dollars to Jesuit education here in the United States. Then you have Deborah Birx. She's the ambassador. That's what they call her, the ambassador to combat the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And that is her role. Now, when she was sworn in back in April of 2014, she was sworn in by a Jesuit priest named Father Dan McDonald. McDonald, who specifically, he said in his speech, he said, quote, "I understand originally that Dr. Birx had requested that Pope Francis do this invocation, but he was a little occupied." Ha, 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 and then they laugh, right? So that's how they began her swearing in. And so then she becomes the AIDS ambassador for the United States. And she's the blonde-haired lady known for wearing these scarves. And you're seeing a lot of her on TV even today. Now, the front man for all of this, and the most important of them, is Dr. Anthony Fauci, that has held his position as an immunologist. He is the, quote, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He assumed office November 2nd, 1984. Get that now, 1984. That's the year he was put into office. Under Ronald Reagan, he served under Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and now Donald Trump. This guy is a deep state Jesuit, I believe. People go out of their way to talk about his Jesuitical way of doing things. Okay, for example, CNN.com has an article where they say, quote, "Dr. Fauci is a man with a scientific mind, a compassionate heart, and a Jesuitical commitment to helping others." All right. Fauci graduated first in his class at Cornell Medical College. He has only praise for the Jesuit liberal arts education he received, etc. Dr. Anthony Fauci, point man on coronavirus, is a Jesuit Holy Cross alum. So you have people who have been educated by the Jesuits, but they don't necessarily carry that with them so much when they get out into the world and pursue other things. I don't think that everybody necessarily who went to a Jesuit institution is, quote, a Jesuit. But Dr. Fauci is really somewhat different because where his profile is concerned, he is a Roman Catholic, and everybody goes out of their way to talk about his Jesuitical everything and to associate him with the Jesuit order repeatedly. But even though he's held this job, this position since 1984, never before in more than 30 years has he given this kind of advice over any sort of viral anything. I mean, when Obama was in office and there was the swine flu and hundreds of thousands of people were being hospitalized, 60 million Americans were infected with swine flu. Over 12,000 Americans died from the swine flu. But nowhere, at no point, did Dr. Fauci give the advice to President Obama that he needs to shut down the country and wreck the economy. Nowhere did he give that kind of advice until we get to Donald J. Trump. And so now the question is, where is this movement headed? What are they going to do from this point going forward? We're going to talk more about that when we come back right after this. President Donald Trump right now during the coronavirus crisis that has impacted not only our country, but the entire world. Remember, I've talked about this before. When you see something like this that affects so many different countries, you have to think about who is it that has the ability to do that. And when you talk about Rome, you're talking about an institution that has churches, colleges, universities, a whole assortment of schools, prep schools, and this kind of thing, tens of thousands of them all over the world. That is a massive amount of influence, not to mention the intelligence network. The Vatican's intelligence network is said to be the most extensive and the most effective anywhere in the world. We've heard this repeatedly. But now I want to draw your attention to the testimony of one of the great men of law in all of history, Sir Edward Coke. Sir Edward Coke. We talk about Coke in our upcoming documentary on the true Christian history of America. Coke is probably most famous for coining the phrase that a man's home is his castle. Coke's legal influence is said to be directly responsible for 4 of the amendments that we have in our Bill of Rights. Coke was also the prosecutor for the gunpowder treason. In 1605, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. There are many variations of that poem. One of them says, I'll give you a reason why Jesuit treason never should be forgot. Now, during the trial, Coke testified. He said this. He said, quote, I never yet knew a treason without a Romish priest. But in this there are very many Jesuits, who are known to have dealt and passed through the whole action. 3 of them are legares, meaning leader, certain kind of leader, and statesmen, as Henry Garnet, alias Wally, the superintendent of the Jesuits. Here in England, Henry Garnet is the one who is chiefly mentioned whenever they mention the gunpowder plot. But Coke revealed that there were many other Jesuits involved. So he starts by mentioning Henry Garnet, and then he says Father Cresswell, Jesuit in Spain, Father Baldwin in Flanders, as parsons at Rome, etc. So that the principal offenders are the seducing Jesuits, men that use the reverence of religion, yea, even the most sacred and blessed name of Jesus as a mantle to cover their impiety, blasphemy, treason, and rebellion, and all manner of wickedness. End quote. Sir Edward Coke. That's what he said about the Jesuits after they were exposed in the gunpowder treason. And the first part of it, I never yet knew a treason without a Romish priest. Bear that in mind. Never knew a treason without a Romish priest. And what are we finding? I mean, right now, inside the U.S. Capitol, folks, the chaplain of the House of Representatives, Patrick J. Conroy, is a Jesuit priest. He was put there by Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner, both of them Roman Catholics. Okay, so where is this movement headed? What are they planning to do next? Well, let's look at this quote here. This was played by Tucker Carlson on Fox News. And here he's quoting a World Health Organization official who says that over this coronavirus, they may have to enter people's homes and remove family members. Listen.
Last week, Dr. Michael Ryan, he's a leader at the World Health Organization, announced that in response to the spread of this virus, authorities may have to enter people's homes and remove family members, presumably by force.
In most parts of the world, due to lockdown, most of the transmission that's actually happening in many countries now is happening in the household, at family level. In some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units. Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them in a safe and dignified manner.
Just so you know, we're coming to your house, seizing your children and, quote, isolating them in a safe and dignified manner.
Okay, now that guy, again, with the World Health Organization, Michael Ryan, whose voice you heard, If you remember the Irish accent there, he's the same guy who was at this event 201 with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Or he was communicating by Skype at the event. But we played his audio on the program. He was one of the guys saying that he had no doubt that there was going to be a pandemic. And so the dress rehearsal that they were doing was very important, and etc. Well, this is the same guy who now says that they're going to have to go into people's homes and presumably, as Tucker Carlson said, take people by force. I mean, you can just see New World Order thuggery on the horizon if this thing is allowed to move forward this way. Now, it's kind of hard to believe that during the Trump administration this would be allowed. But let me tell you something. A very disturbing report coming out of China, I've been watching this now for more than a week, where they have been talking about the people dying from coronavirus, and people, whenever they talk about it, they will sometimes mention the fact that the incinerators are going night and day, giving the impression that they are burning the bodies of the people who are dying of coronavirus there in China. Now it's being reported on Breitbart that funeral homes are burning coronavirus victims alive in Wuhan. And the Breitbart article says, quote, locals in Wuhan, where the Chinese coronavirus pandemic originated, have heard screams coming from funeral home furnaces, and some treated in hospitals say they saw workers put living coronavirus patients in body bags, Radio Free Asia reported on Monday. I mean, this is Holocaust kind of stuff, folks. This is the kind of, I mean, we're sitting here reading this, watching it, and we're thinking, this is unbelievable. Can this really be happening? And could this really happen in America? It's very difficult to believe that this could ever move forward in the United States, especially for those of us who can remember America going back to the 1970s and 80s. I mean, this would be the farthest thing in the world. If you tried to talk to somebody back then about this happening here, they would say, oh, you got to be kidding. There's no way. It couldn't happen here. That's what they would say. But now it appears as though the world has been turned upside down in a very short period of time. But of course, none of this takes our mighty God in heaven by surprise. That we've got to remember. We may have been surprised by all of this, but God, who knows the end from the beginning, he's not surprised. The scripture says, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord shall deliver him from every one. Praise the Lord. All right, brethren, that is going to do it for us today. That is our show. We'll stop it there, but we will be back. Years has he given